Hi, I'm Rod Montag.
I'm Cody Matushik.
And we are the movie reviewers. And this is our debut video for our podcast, The Movie Reviewers. And we're very excited to have you here today. Today we'll be talking about something really interesting. We're going to be talking about the notions of pathos and logos in movies. And basically we're going to kind of keep it very straightforward in what we're talking about. When we're talking about pathos, we're talking about ways in which emotion play and persuade an audience of what is to accept what's occurring on screen, as opposed to logos, which deals with logic and reason as the foundation for the narrative that we're being given. Okay, so we're going to talk today about both. We're going to look at different films that utilize both and which ones are more effective. And I think that'd be an interesting subject for you guys. Think about which films affect you and why they affect you. Okay, when we talk about pathos, pathos is an interesting thing because basically we're looking at how does emotion impact us, and there are different types of emotions. There's multiple emotions happening simultaneously. There's movie emotions, and then there are real life emotions. Real life emotions, oftentimes we are the subject of our own emotions, and the outcome of how we respond to things emotionally is not predictable. They're not preset. We don't know if it's a minor emotion, major emotion, if it's a positive or negative emotion. Oftentimes those things are not pre-scripted or predetermined. And the fact is that when you deal with that reality in a movie, the movie has a preset or pre-scripted set of outcomes based on those emotions. In other words, the emotions serve a specific purpose to the story. And that's something that I think is important for us to keep in mind. I've always thought this was rather interesting. So when you talk about having an emotional experience in a film, are you experiencing that emotion, or are you simply reacting to that emotional experience? You see what I mean? And that's something I think we have to really look at when we talk about different films, okay? You are the subject for the real life emotions that you have, okay? You are the centerpiece. But when you're watching a film, you are witnessing the emotions of others, okay? And you only are there kind of in a pseudo kind of context, you are kind of the pseudo subject. In other words, it's happening to you via your proxy on screen. And that's something that is important for us to keep in mind. And we'll get into logos later on, okay? What do you think of when you think about pathos in film, Cody?
I usually think of highly emotional films like The Notebook, Secondhand Lines, and Big Fish.
Okay. Why those films in particular?
Really, with The Notebook, it's any Nicholas Sparks book.
Right.
Because he always does emotionally charged novels, and they always translate into his movies where something tragic happens.
Okay. Look, when we're talking about the emotional experience in films, oftentimes emotion is meant to convey the experience for us. We want to say that this person is experiencing a change in their lives emotionally. And the question then becomes, if that's the case, how do you structure a story based on that idea or concept? How are stories structured based on, an emotional reality versus a logical or reasonable or realistic, I guess we can use, reality?
Right, and that's a hard thing for the writers to do because
they
need to know
and
the
it's oftentimes
audience.
not done well.
It is very much not done well.
Right.
It's all up to the writers, the screenwriters, knowing what audience they want to reach out for. If they don't know what audience they're reaching for, they're going to convey the wrong messages, and people are going to be very confused by the emotions they're trying to get the audience to convey.
And that's an important thing: is that there is potential emotional confusion. Okay, and that's the thing to keep in mind, is that the emotions are there to drive the credibility of the character, but they have to be relatable emotions. So what they do is they tend to take conventional, because you're trying to reach this broad audience, you tend to take conventional, you either do one of two ways, I would say. You take a conventional experience, in the case of the Notebook, romance, a romantic experience, and that's a conventional setup pretty much, falling in love with somebody, etc. You take that experience and then you make the person go through the evolution of the emotions through the relationship. The relationship is relatively pedestrian, I would say, in the Notebook. I know I might get some hate for that, but it is. It's a relatively pedestrian relationship. And so I think when you're talking about this whole thing, then it's about how are they experiencing these emotions, and do I experience emotions like that the same way? But the other thing you can do when you look at The Notebook, which is interesting, is that is the film reflective of an emotional experience that people have, or is it aspirational?
Right, and that's a tough one because The Notebook is all flashbacks and it's trying to reflect the romance that they once had.
Right. Yeah, I mean it's the romance that they once have that's coming to an end. So it seems to me a mixture, at least in my view, when it comes to it, that there is like we've all had that thing where romance has come to an end. Okay, I mean who's the audience for this film? Would you say?
Middle-aged women.
Middle-aged women. Why would you say that? By the way, I just want to note. By the way, Cody's saying this, so I'm just saying, just want to differentiate between the two of us. You know, I'm the guy here on the left. Okay, anyway, go ahead, or the right.
Because it's for the people that have fallen in love before, truly in love, not this middle school, high school.
Okay,
I have a crush on you. It's the people that have truly given their heart to somebody else.
Would you say now? This is interesting because if we're going to say that, that makes certain assumptions about love for that middle-aged audience, doesn't it?
It does.
Well, what would you say are the assumptions? There are assumptions there. I mean, what would you say are some of the assumptions?
That everybody finds love, which is not true.
Okay.
There's some people who would rather be by themselves than actually put themselves out there because of the feelings of, I'm okay with myself. I don't need someone else.
Right. I mean, one thing that scholars have talked about is the notion that one of the inherent elements of a film that is emotionally centric is this notion of risk. And there is, in the real world, there is unlimited risk, and there in the movie world, the movie spectator world, there is limited risk. And there's a distinction between the two that I think we have to talk about. Okay, when we're talking about unlimited risk is that there's a potential permanent damage and harm that a film could do to our, or not a film, excuse me, but life can do to our psyche. We always experience trauma, and we have no idea necessarily the depth of that trauma when that trauma is occurring.
Right.
Okay? We can be unconscious of the depth of that trauma. Films are limited in the impact they tend to have on us because we are one step removed from the trauma.
Right.
Okay? And that's also true not just for negative emotions, but for positive emotions too. Because when we talk about positive emotions, they can be life-changing. So getting married, falling in love, whatever. Those can be things you carry with you. As opposed to the emotions that are in a film, which are temporary placeholders in your existence. Because you are accepting the reality of somebody else. And then you are stepping out of that reality, and that reality is no longer your own. So you now have to kind of re-emerge with your own emotional state. You know, I mean, I think that's one thing for us to think about too. The other thing is that one of the key elements of this in an emotional film is the notion of distance. Okay, the emotional distance. So in other words, what is the relationship between the two parties or the two events? So it could be two people, or it could be an event and a person. It could be, for example, slavery and the slave owner. Okay, so what is that relationship? Okay, that relationship is one that tends to be organic based on the economic social conditions of the time period. That's very different in a film because in a film you can cheat that.
Right.
In the film, you can create an anti-slavery slave owner. That contradiction.
Right.
Okay? So, I think when we're talking about these different films that have emotional experiences connected to it, the notion of distance is one that we have to be a little, at least for me, I think I have to be a little more cynical about it. Because I know that the narrative is manipulating this to preset a type of relationship and therefore a type of connection and distance, okay? I mean, movie emotions are basically, what I'm basically saying is that they're more amenable to control, okay? You can make them distant, you can bring them together, far apart. You know, there's a level, you can make them they're much more malleable than they are in real life. You can't manipulate emotions to the degree that you can in a film, okay? They can be done in ways that are completely unrealistic and ways that we would find kind of pseudo-realistic. Is that...
Oh, that's very much true.
I mean, what would be an example, do you think, of a movie that is very emotionally manipulative in unrealistic ways, but effective?
That's a tough one.
Well, I'll give you one that I think works, that does that, and this will warm the cockles of your heart. Psycho.
True.
Psycho is not a realistic film. it's based on real things that happened. But the scenario set up there is to manipulate us in very specific ways.
Right.
Okay? For one thing, there's this notion of, I think, of this notion of the vulnerable. And that there is a difference between the vulnerable and the innocent.
Right.
Because you have the Janet Leigh character in the film who commits an immoral act.
Correct.
And so we, however, are with her through this immoral act, and the script as put together, and I think it's a very effective script, the script as it's put together makes us feel not like we want to be sympathetic towards her, but we actually start to identify with her as we start to see into her psyche and to her emotional state, right?
Right.
Right? We see how people have treated her, how she's been ignored, her lover, her boss, the customer. You remember that cowboy customer, right?
Yep.
All this kind of stuff. And so we're kind of on her. We end up being on her side. And then once he's manipulated us to actually create some sort of sympathetic connection with her, we now fear for her when she's put into this other situation. But he had to create the first emotion for the second emotion. If you don't have the first emotion, the second emotion doesn't work. We would feel nothing for this character when she meets her demise. I mean, and that's the thing, is that we have come to know her, and we've come to occupy her consciousness and her emotional state. And once we've done that, once Hitchcock has caught us in that snare, there's no easy way out of that, I would say.
And Hitchcock was a master at using that technique.
Yeah, I mean, that's a... And so I think that's one way to think of it. What would you say is another film that might do that?
Honestly, if you go back into like the 1930s horror films,
sure,
because there's always a damsel in distress, and a lot of those original Universal monster movies, they actually took the time and made these damsels in distress real people, not just this one-dimensional person.
Right. I mean, I think you can also look at the like melodramas, though. I think you can look at melodramas and achieve the same outcome. So if you look at very powerful emotional dramas, I'll give you one. You look at The Way We Were, with was it Robert Redford and Barbara Streisand, and this is a film it's actually very class centric, about two people from different classes who are attracted to each other. And part of the reason I would argue they're attracted to each other is that Redford sees in her a life that is an escape from his own. I don't think it's true love. I don't think it ever rises to the level of true love. I think she represents an escape for him, an emotional escape, a decompression, if you will, from the starchiness of his own lifestyle. And she is appreciative of the emotional impact she has upon him. And that film, very much as a result of that, because it's using because it's created that scenario, it manipulates the emotions of bringing them emotionally together and apart and all that when the film sees fit to make its point.
Right.
Okay? When it wants to persuade you of the argument or ideas that such a love based upon these desires is not true love.
Right.
I mean, it's an argument about what is true love and what is not true love, and that's why ultimately the film doesn't work out with a true love scenario. Okay? As opposed to, let's look at another film, that also has a great amount packed with emotion. If you look at a classic movie such as Jezebel. Jezebel is a film with Bette Davis. And she, again, there's a class element to that. She's in love with this guy, but she doesn't realize she's in love with him. She's unconscious of her own emotional attraction. She likes being independent and being her own person. What she discovers about that is not emotionally satisfying in the end.
Right.
And it's empty. And then what ends up happening, poof. It's only at the end of the life of the character, his life, the one she's attracted to, that she starts to recognize what the love that she has for him is that he represents a genuine, warm and compassionate human being. When you talk about pathos in films, what do you think are films that don't really work in this regard, would you say?
Really, any of the teen movies that they've released, like 10 Things I Hate About You.
Right. I mean, it's okay, let's talk about that. 10 Things I Hate About You. By the way, it's become a minor classic to some people.
It has.
I mean, not to me personally, but, whatever. I mean, what So you see a lot of these teenage romantic comedies, okay? Why are they, would you say, are they emotionally inauthentic and ineffective?
Because they're showing what they think that teenagers believe is true love. Like,
do they though? I mean, because they're not written by teenagers. I mean, they're not.
It's one of the things like the Spider-Mans.
Right.
The Tobey Maguires. It's written by 40-year-old guys who don't actually understand teenagers.
Okay. So it's not really. So it's not that it's replicating the emotional experience of a teenager. What is it trying to create then?
It's trying to create what that writer believes is what teenagers currently believe is true love. What they're looking for in the perfect companion.
The other thing I would say about this, one of the key elements I would say in regards to emotion within film, is this notion of responsibility. Okay, emotional I'll say accountability. Okay, in other words, who is responsible for the emotional devastation that is caused in a film? And in real life, that's rather severe and real. In films, it's handled with a deft touch.
Yeah.
Okay? If the people get divorced, you don't tend to see really much emotional accountability. And you seem to be able to just get away with that. And I'm wondering if that's deliberate as a way to keep the audience from feeling guilty about the fact that this romantic relationship has not worked.
I believe it's a movie-by-movie case.
Yeah, but it's a movie-by-movie case to a certain extent, but would you say there are certain, like, indicators for that to occur?
Usually, yeah.
You know? I mean, look, emotionally, when we're going to talk about responsibility, it's basically outcome. What are the outcomes of this action? If there's no emotional outcomes, in other words, if you are as the centerpiece, if the subject of the film has no impact, it has no change in his or her life, if it doesn't fundamentally change or impact the way they live their lives or how they think, then there's very little emotional accountability of that character, would you say?
Oh yeah, definitely.
You know, where I think one film that I actually think is guilty of this is a very good film is Gone with the Wind, because she doesn't really fundamentally ever change her character in the second half of the movie, despite
not at all.
The death of a child and the loss of a husband.
Right.
So I think we have to. That's something, you know. I mean, emotion. I mean, you can have emotions of anger, hatred, aggression, but you can do it without anybody getting hurt. You know. In other words, in our lives, when we emotionally do something hateful, love-filled, based on lust, sex, desire, if you will, there are outcomes that we can't easily walk away from. Correct?
That is correct.
What films do is that there is no post-emotional.
Would you say consequence?
Yeah, I mean, there's no. I mean, there's no post-movie commitment.
Right.
To any of those emotions.
Right.
You can just save them all. You can just, let them go because you are not entangled in that experience. Okay, and that's where the notion of distance is. Why the notion of distance is so important.
Right.
And why many films, I feel, in the end, do not want you to be but too close to emotionally to the character. Or emotionally too closely identify with the character. You're always one step removed, you know?
Right.
Again, it's that notion of being sympathetic, but not empathetic. Aspirational.
Right.
You know? And potentially, depending on the subject of the character, inspirational. I mean, if we're going to talk about emotional movies, we're going to talk about this notion of persuading people of reality through pathos. What do you feel is a film that really does that causes us to feel emotional empathy for a character?
I believe Secondhand Lions.
Okay, talk about this movie.
It was released in 2003 and stars Haley Joel Osment,
Right.
Michael Caine, and Robert Duvall.
Yeah. All right. So, what's the story about? Why do you feel there's a certain amount of emotional empathy that operates?
Basically, it's about this kid whose mother goes, "I'll have a new boyfriend, and I heard we have some really rich great uncles who are probably going to die soon. Right. So what you're going to do is spend the summer with them, get to know them, let them love you, and they'll give you their money when they die."
Wow. Right. I forgot about that.
And this kid actually goes out there and he believes that these two great uncles are just these crotchety old men who have given up on life and just can't wait to die until he actually takes the time to get to know them. And this whole movie just plays out with him going around talking to these uncles, finding about their life story. And this movie is another one that uses the use of flashbacks to tell their story.
And that's another thing we should talk about. Emotion in a film works best when one recognizes that there is a context in which that emotion operates. It must operate within the boundaries and the rules of that world. So the film has to create the rules and boundaries of that world effectively. And Secondhand Lions, okay, part of what it does is that the emotion is centered around the experiences of a child. So that person has limited emotions.
Right.
So you are discovering the emotions vis-a-vis that child every second. And so in other words, how you feel about those older gentlemen, played by Michael Caine and
Robert
Duvall, is very much not determined by you, how you are witnessing and feeling about them, but by
the child's interaction.
How the child is doing it, okay? In other words, the child is the conduit for our own emotions, okay? And so, okay, the context for our real life emotions are quite different, how it operates. Because in real life, the context for our emotions is constantly shifting and changing.
Oh, yes.
And there are natural distances, close and far, that exist. That's a good film that is emotionally centric, creates rules in terms, and the subject is also very important to the film.
Right.
Because how much emotional self-awareness that character has very much will determine the nature of the experience you can do. For example, you can do a film about sexual exploration, and usually it's done with younger characters. Sexual awakening. Done with young teenage characters, right?
Yes.
As opposed to older characters, except even there, it's with very older characters, it's a reawakening, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's something that's very interesting. I would also say, I was thinking of another film, one film which does this, and this film, it gets mixed reviews, but it is a film that has won Academy Awards, La La Land. And La La Land actually, using music and using set pieces, creates this pseudo-reality where these characters who are not realistically drawn can fall in love. In other words, it sets an unrealistic space for these characters to fall in love with. In other words, it's an imagined reality, and they are almost self-aware that's imagined reality, so they can interact in that reality in ways that are unrealistic. They can dance in the middle of the park. You know what I'm saying? It's like, that's not realistic. That's not a thing. It's very much derived, and that's found in older films a lot of times, so American in Paris.
Right.
Where it's not realistic, but it creates a fantasy scenario where you can engage in emotional interaction in unrealistic ways. And context, therefore, I think is a key element to creating an effective film that is trying to persuade you of reality based upon emotion.
And actually that technique was set up by the silent film era.
Yes, it was. I mean, many of the silent films were actually emotionally driven. They were driven either by love, by hatred, by carnal desire.
Or by dreams.
Now, dreams are interesting because, and you can look at a film. I mean, I'm thinking of some very, very early films like, what is Alice Guy's Blanchet? What's her film? There's one film I can say. Edison did a film. I think he did Alice in Wonderland. That was actually one of Edison's earliest films.
Yep.
And that film, again, he's using fantasy to create marvelous, spectacular set pieces. I mean, here's another film that I would actually say is actually much more emotionally driven, which is the film The Great Train Robbery. Now, based upon a real event.
Right.
But the film's desire was to make you feel the thrill of being a criminal. And that was a new experience for most people. Most films up to that point that dealt with criminality were morality plays, for the most part.
Right.
And this film is not. That film is trying to get you to become on board with the idea of committing a crime. Even to the end of the picture, where you have one of the most famous shots in film history. It's a brilliant shot by the director. He's pointing the gun at the guy, or at the audience, and shooting it.
Yep.
And the reason that he does that is that he's brought you so completely into the picture as to be on board with this criminal experience. You are now the victim of that violence.
It was a great film technique and never done before then.
It was not done before then, but what it showed is that, and by the way, people freaked the heck out and ran out of the theater. People were freaking out. about that. They were like, oh my god, they were like screaming like, oh my god, we're shot, like they were freaking out. Let's switch gears now and talk about this notion of logic or reason and persuasion as the centerpieces of a film. The films, when I think about this is actually quite a different experience because films that basically use reason and logic as the centerpieces for their world building and character building are not also trying to create realistic characters. Usually the characters serve as proxies for philosophies, belief systems, ideologies in the place of real sinew, flesh, and bone.
Right.
Okay? One thing, I'll tell you the films that I was thinking about. When I was thinking about this, and it occurred to me perfectly, a film that I think does that incredibly well is The Matrix. The characters in the film each represent a different philosophical approach towards reality.
Yes.
Okay? One could actually argue that Neo actually represents, a type of redemption character. In other words, it's a character that believes that man can be changed to evolve greater than logic. Because remember, the character himself is kind of an anomaly. I mean, literally, he's the anomaly. He's the emotional, logical anomaly. He's the thing that doesn't work in the Matrix.
Right.
And much of the movie of Matrix is the effort to try to figure out what his potential is. And what you realize by the end of the film is that humanity is limitless in their potential.
Right.
And it uses the various powers he develops, from missing bullets to learning new kung fu techniques to flying at the end of the movie. That it's making a statement. The character is not about, well, he's a character that likes the Bruins. And he drinks beer, and he goes, in other words, there's no backstory. We don't know about his parents.
Nope.
We know almost nothing about his life. We don't know, I went to Harvard, or I went to Yale. No, we have no idea who this guy is, really. He's almost a blank slate. Because Neo is not a real person. He's an idea in a world full of ideas, because that's what the Matrix is. The Matrix is simply a set of codes, ones and zeros, that have been played out logically into a real world format. That's it. I mean, and every character fits into that world in very specific ways. Okay? And that's what's so fascinating about that movie, when I think about Matrix, is that they create these arguments about reality that are not emotionally centric. Where the film itself, not the film The Matrix, but The Matrix Reloaded and The Matrix Revolution goes off the rails because they try to have their cake and eat it too. They try to then turn it into an emotional experience. And I don't think those films successfully convert that.
Not at all.
The first film says that the world is a set of rules, but even in the revolution, that is itself a reality. That in other words, there are always going to be iconoclastic elements, disturbing and undermining. Marx talked about this.
Yes, he did.
That when you try to create so much restraint onto a world center, then the outcome of revolutionary is predictable. That revolutions are not only inevitable, they are in some cases desirable. And that's something that we see, is that the film itself attempts, and the three films to their credit try to do this. They try to show that the revolution itself is logical. Even the revolution itself is an idea, right?
Yes.
Despite the emotional centerpiece of the films, the revolutions themselves are simply ideas operating. Because remember, he's not the first anomaly.
No.
In Matrix Reloaded, we discover that Neo is essentially one of many generations of anomalies.
Right.
And I think that's something to keep in mind. That basically one of the ground rules for making a film that's based on logic and reason is that you have to create a set of principles and guidelines by which that world must follow. And if you change them, or if they evolve in any way, you really have to basically have to explain to your audience why. And I'll tell you how you see it in the Matrix. Because in the Matrix, this is how you see it. You basically have this whole thing where we can't figure out what Neo is, so the Matrix itself is unable to adapt. And so the elements that are meant to be the reactive elements within the Matrix themselves adapt in unpredictable ways to do with this anomaly. You know which character I'm talking about. that deals with it in unpredictable ways. That these reactors, Agent
Smith.
Agent Smith. Agent Smith is basically the reaction to the breaking of the rules, and he himself then becomes an unpredictable, unsafe element within the Matrix that the Matrix tries to expunge unsuccessfully. Right?
Yep.
And so the film is explaining this action, explaining these ideas through these characters. These characters themselves are not driven by emotion. You're not experiencing their emotional realities. You're experiencing a set of logical rules that are being changed and broken by the filmmakers. In other words, the star of the film is not Keanu Reeves. It is not Lawrence Fishburne. It is the Wachowski brother and sister.
Right.
The directors, in other words. And that's true for, I would say, for a number of films that deal in this kind of thing, where that kind of reality, that sets a set of rules or parameters for a world and then plays them out. A person who's really good at doing that, because he doesn't create, I don't think he creates emotionally deep films. I think he creates films based on logic and reason that are very masterful and brilliant, is Christopher Nolan.
Yes.
I don't think he creates deep emotional experiences. I think he does world building with rules and principles, and then challenges his own rules and principles to see how far he can take them.
Yes.
I think that's part of the reason why people like the Batman trilogy that he did so much, because the films themselves are not emotionally gratifying in any real way. You don't really ever feel emotional connections towards any of the characters. Well, I mean, did you?
Not at all.
No. I mean, what would you say was one of the things that struck you so profoundly about those films? Why do you think those films worked?
They worked because they were such an escape from what the Batman movies were. They actually took the time to develop the Bruce Wayne character.
They did, but the thing about the Bruce Wayne character is that his entire existence is based on the rules of Gotham.
Yes.
They create, because it's Gotham you're introduced to before Bruce Wayne.
It is.
And so they say, this is the culture, these are the rules and the boundaries and parameters of Gotham. And now I'm going to put this element in and watch him evolve and not respond emotionally, because he's got the emotional depth of a pea.
Oh, yeah.
But you see him creating now a mindset that there must be now a new justice system put into place that is non-institutionally based.
Right, because the institutions have failed. That's why Gotham is the way it is.
Right, and the film is profoundly conservative in its views, because it's using this notion that only individuals are great men.
Yep.
Heroes. With raw power. In late-stage capitalism will be successful. Which is not true for emotionally centric film. That's trying to persuade you that the emotional experience is the centerpiece of this universe that binds this universe together. It's not. What makes this film successful are basically that there is a set of rules and ideas that the world continues to. And what's interesting is that throughout the films, those rules and ideas and belief systems are unchanging. And what happens is that they begin to snap the inflexible Batman character.
Right.
And what I mean by snap, let me say what I mean by snap, is that he himself thinks he's going to help change the rules to make the system work better. Is that fair enough to say?
It is.
Okay. He's going to make the rules work better. He's going to make it all work better. When he ends up becoming the what in the film? You only live long enough until you become the...
Well, depending on which one you're looking at, the vigilante, the martyr.
Right. And the villain. Right, because you get that by the end of The Dark Knight.
Yes, you do.
And then when The Dark Knight Returns comes around, as bad as that film is, and I don't think it's a good film, as bad as that film is, the film is all about the question of good and bad or should not be the basis by which a society should be run.
Right.
Okay? What's his name? I just blanked on his name. The character's name.
Christian Bale.
No, the
Tom
villain.
Hardy.
What's his name? What's the villain's name?
Bane.
Bane. One of the centerpieces of Bane's character, what makes that character interesting, is that he is questioning this notion of morality.
Yes.
And the hypocrisy of it, and that it doesn't fit in the world of leaders.
Right.
And that as Batman, if you want to be a leader, you cannot be a good man.
Right.
Because your goodness will destroy people. It will make you weak, and it will allow criminals to get away with things.
Yeah, and that's exactly the end of the Dark Knight.
Well, and that's the reality. And that's the thing you're looking for in the film.
Yeah.
Well, here's the thing. That's the thing. I'd be curious to see what your guys' views is on this. But again, I think the film is basically arguing a conservative notion of justice, ethics, and a rejection of arbitrary or individual morality. I think that's a real question that must be raised. So that's something I think worth something to think about. Okay, what would you say is another film? We talked about The Matrix. Brought up The Matrix. I brought up the Batman trilogy. What do you think is another film that is much more centered around reason and logic as the foundation for the creation of a universe than emotion?
I'm curious to debate this one with you.
Okay, well, you think I will agree?
I'm curious to see what your insight is. I'm thinking Fight Club. Because it is a man who sees society and knows that that's a society he cannot fit in with, mentally, emotionally.
Right, and quite frankly, the author, Chuck, what's his name?
Palahniuk.
Chuck Palahniuk. He doesn't create real characters.
He does not.
He doesn't create characters. He creates archetypes.
Yes.
That's what he does, and I think the film is representative of his style.
It is very much so.
Which sometimes works, sometimes doesn't. Works great when you do Fight Club. Works really bad when you do Choke. I don't like Choke. I'm not gonna lie. I think
Sam Rockwell.
It's not a good movie. It's not a good film. I'm sorry, but okay. But to your question, does Fight Club attempt to create a consistent universe of rules for us to witness, experience, and try to untangle and figure out? Because that's also part of the challenge. One could actually argue that these kind of films are intellectual puzzles, and I think there's certainly a truth in that. Certainly more so with that film than others generally, because it's going to do that. But the problem with the film, the reason I wouldn't say it is I wouldn't say it is. And I'll tell you why. We're never given enough data. There's never enough. We're given enough data with The Matrix.
Right.
Like, we understand why Agent Smith goes berserk. We understand why Bane comes into existence. We understand those things. Even the Joker.
Right.
We are never given clear insight, I think, in the rules of that universe. Because it's based upon a fundamental lie. That the universe he's created before us is real, and it's not.
Right.
Right, because you have two characters, and we're going to, by the way, this one I'm actually try not to spoil, guys, because it's a really good twist. But the relationship he thinks he has, the Edward Norton character, is not the relationship he actually has.
Right.
So the problem is, it's created rules that it has knowingly already broken. But it has not indicated that to the audience. A person who does do that really well, why his films are emotionally shallow in many ways, but they are technically and brilliant in their logic and their world building, is Hitchcock.
Yes.
Okay? He doesn't create deep emotional characters that you can empathize with and whatever, and carry their pain with you on that journey. No. He didn't do any of that. Okay? He makes you try to figure out the puzzle, and he gives you clues.
Yes.
He gives you enough clues if you pay attention. And you go back and watch him like, oh, I should have figured that out.
Right.
I should have seen that. You can still love it because it's a puzzle. But it's enough rules and enough contextual hints to understand the film and understand the rules by which the world is based on and why people are behaving as they do in that world. I don't think Fight Club does that.
All right.
I mean, well, what do you think?
It's a tough one because this is one I was going back and forth on because there are elements when he realizes, okay, this society, things should not be going this way.
Right. Yes.
We need to actually find a way to fight the system.
Sure.
And actually, the character, I wasn't looking at it as the Brad Pitt character at all. Okay. The Norton character. Okay. I was looking at it through the eyes of the Meatloaf character.
Oh, okay. Okay, I wasn't...
And if you look at how he looks at the film, everything is logical. Like, there's this group, and we're together because we love each other. And because of that, we will help support one another. And if we look at this right, society has kept us down and has told us we can't be acting this way.
Sure.
But why can't we?
Why? Yeah. I mean, but there's never... Would you say there's an answer to that in the film?
Sort of. And unfortunately, without spoiling the end of the movie, it's really hard
but
to
I don't even think the end of the movie gives you an answer.
Yes and no. It depends on...
See, because when I think of the end of the movie, I think the film says there is no answer. That what we created doesn't work. So we have to start from ground zero and rebuild.
Which is, honestly, an honest outlook on it.
Well, I'm not saying it's not an honest outlook, but I don't think it's an answer, though.
Right.
It doesn't say we should put this type of thing in place, and therefore, because we must do that, we must first remove this. Like, that would be an answer to me.
Right.
Like, okay, A is in place, A doesn't work, B has to replace it.
Right.
They never come to B. They're not deep thinkers that way. There's no depth to this. Now, one thing I do want to make note of is I wanted to quote something that Aristotle said. I wanted to just or a paraphrase it when he talked about logos. And he said this: "It enables the human being to perform as no other animal can." Again, I'm paraphrasing the idea of Aristotle, so just take it at that. It makes possible for him to perceive and make clear to others through reasoned discourse the difference between what is advantageous and what is harmful, between what is just and what is unjust, between what is good and what is evil. Okay, and something else. There's one other thing I wanted to talk about. This is that logos is not. It's not an emotional appeal per se, but rather emotional appeals that that have no bearing on the issue, and that they simulate a lack or rate. Excuse me. They simulate lack or at any rate are not shown to possess any intrinsic connection with the point at issue. And basically, now what were we saying when we're saying all this? But basically that I don't believe there's an emotional center to that world.
No, from that viewpoint, there definitely isn't.
Some would disagree with me, and I have certainly one guy I know who will disagree with me quite strongly. And so I expect to hear from him when he sees this, and he's going to fight with me about it, and which is good. I think it's a cool thing. What else would you say about? Now, here's the thing. What do you think is the more rewarding experience for an audience?
It depends on the audience, because if they're an intellectual audience that actually likes to think about things...
Well, I mean, is it a matter of personal taste, then you're saying?
I believe it is.
I mean, I'm wondering that, because there are films we've had that have been hits in both ways, but I mean, you're saying that the audiences are exclusive?
Not necessarily. I'm just thinking of someone like my wife. She's not going to go see a movie because it's emotional. She wants to see it because there's someone in there that she likes, and it'll actually give her something to think about.
You think so?
Most of the time.
She likes Moulin Rouge.
I'm not going to say anything for her taste.
There is nothing intellectual about that movie.
There isn't.
I'm just saying.
Right.
Okay? I'll leave it at that. I won't say she consistently applies that standard.
Right.
To that. I mean, is that fair enough to say?
That is fair enough to say.
You know, I'll take somebody like, I have a friend, you know who she is, who loves nothing but
emotional films.
Emotionally centric films, okay? Part of the reason is that she doesn't like to be taken to this need to try to dissect things, because she finds it a very cold experience that actually causes her to feel that she's on the outside of a film. In other words, it forces her on the outside to look at the film as if it were under a microscope, as if it were some sort of insect or something that she's looking at through that.
Yeah, takes the human element out of it.
Yeah, it takes the human element out of it, and that's a real problem. And she got very angry at me, and I understand why too. Like when I was dissecting the film, some Pixar movies, and things like that. What was the one with the rabbit who wants to become the cop?
That I
can't think of the movie. Anyway, yeah, because she was pretty pissed at me about that one.
Was that Zootopia?
Zootopia, that's it. Thank you, Zootopia. Yeah, she was kind of pissed at me about that because what she felt the film was aspirational. You know?
Right.
And so that gave her genuine emotional satisfaction because it was this young rabbit trying to achieve her dreams. And you go on this emotional journey of feeling you're inferior, but actually obtaining and achieving great things despite those feelings of inferiority and shyness, etc. And that the experience can change you emotionally, and that emotional journey and that emotional maturity will allow you then to achieve great things. Where I looked at it as a dissection on racial politics.
Right.
And again, she found that very distasteful. So, again, I thought of it intellectually. She thought of it emotionally. And one does not invalidate the other, certainly. But I wonder, does it enhance it or does it take away from it? Because for her, it takes away from it.
Right. And, again, that's a tough call because...
No, for you. Well, let's talk about you.
For me?
Well, for you. Let's say for you.
I always try to look for the intellectual aspects of a movie.
Sure.
I'm a huge horror film
Yes,
guy.
you are. Yes, you are.
Sure, there's a few emotions that are just under the surface of most horror films.
But even you. Let's talk about. Okay, fine. You like bizarre comedies.
I do.
Which I don't. I don't have a great sense of humor. I don't find I don't find 90% of things people find funny. I don't find funny at all. I'll be real with you guys. I don't find most things funny, but Cody will find very dark things and twisted things humorous, even when not intended to be. Why is that? Because it's not because it's intellectually gratifying.
No, it's just your outlook. Like,
okay,
it becomes so irrational.
Right.
Like, look at films like Death to Smoochie, Throw Mama from the Train.
But Throw Mama from the Train is, I think, a really great emotional film.
It is.
Emotionally centric film. But I think it's totally realistic in many ways. I mean, I think the film about Throw Mama from the Train is metaphorical. It's metaphorical.
Oh, yes. Very much so.
I mean...
But...
It's based on... You know what the film is based on?
That I do not.
You don't? Oh, really? It's based on Strangers on a Train.
Okay.
The Hitchcock movie.
Yep, I had a feeling.
Those are the two films. It's based on that. It's a comedy. It's a comedic version of that.
Right.
And again, it takes this concept and whatever. But there is some humor to that. It's not an intellectual experience.
Right.
Does it tend to reinforce your own emotional reaction to the world? What would you say? In other words, do you see do the characters and scenarios do the characters you gravitate towards? I guess what we're talking about here. Do the characters you gravitate towards? We're going to talk about this, and you guys be part of this conversation. Do the characters you gravitate towards, or do they reinforce your own unique perceptions of the world? Would you say?
That I do not, because
you don't think so.
It's tough because one way I answer I'm a sociopath, the other way I answer I'm a psychopath.
This is where his wife actually does a lot of work in psychology, so this would actually be useful for our purposes to actually have that discussion with her. It would also make us question then, what she would diagnose you as.
Right.
But could you say then we all have some element of that?
I believe we do.
To an extent.
Yes.
I mean, that's, because I think it does. I think the thing that makes comedies work for people is that it reinforces their own worldview to a certain extent, or it's so counter to their own worldview that it's almost absurd.
Right. And with the black comedies, it's a satire on emotions.
Which you like to do.
Yes.
Particularly because a lot of emotions are hypocritical.
Right.
Right. Or they're born out of unrealistic understandings of the world.
Right.
So I think that's something to think about. Okay. I know we're coming we're coming up now to our point. What is there any last things we want to say about this? About these subjects?
It's really what our listeners like. We would love to hear from you. Are you more into the pathos or into the logos?
I mean, what impacts you guys emotionally, intellectually? What do you think are at the heart of your movie-going experience that make a film worth seeing? We'd be really interested to know. So, write in the comments, okay? Anyway, we really appreciate you guys taking this journey with us. We know there will certainly be debate about these terms, even the way we're applying them, because we're applying them in unique ways.
We are.
So we'd love to hear from you guys in the comments. Thank you guys very much. And I am Rod Montag.
I'm Cody Matushik.
And we are the Movie Reviewers.